Hey, what's up guys? Today I'm joined by my friend Mike Rosa from the Anabolic Aliens, and we're going to talk to you guys about the key differences in building muscle versus building strength. Because my workouts primarily focus on muscle building, and Mike is actually a pro powerlifter, just got his powerlifting card, his pro card, really pumped about that, holds various titles worldwide and on the East Coast. That's pretty good, man. Congratulations. He just got his pro card recently. But what we want to do, the reason why we wanted to make this video is because Mike and I see a lot of people in the gym that struggle. And the main reason why a lot of you guys struggle is because, let's face it, there's a lot of bullshit misinformation, especially on YouTube, telling you guys how to lift in the gym without really giving you a reason or asking you what your goal is. So we're going to divide it in half and make it very clear. If your goal is muscle building, you're going to know what to do. If your goal is building strength, you're going to know what to do. And you're actually going to know the clear differences.
And we just want to also make it a point to say we're reaching out to the natural lifters, where if you're on some kind of gear, you can pretty much gain muscle and strength doing whatever you want to do. So we're going to talk about the specific cues for muscle building and the specific ones for strength, and just give you guys the facts. And let's get into it.
So I'm sure a lot of you who are watching this video might have hit a point in your routines where you've plateaued, especially if you're a beginner lifter. And it's mainly due to lack of knowledge and misinformation. For example, Mike and I both talked about this. When we're in the gym, we see a lot of people training that are doing, we know they're clearly doing a muscle building workout because we can see the sets and reps that they're doing and what exercises they're choosing, but they're incorporating techniques of strength training with their muscle building program. And now, if you're a newbie lifter, you're going to see gains no matter what program you do, as long as you're eating right and you're consistent for like 4 to 6 months. Once those newbie gains are over, that's where you're going to fall into a huge problem because you're going to plateau and you're going to have no idea why. You might be working with things like progressive overload, you might be doing shorter rest periods, you might be incorporating techniques not knowing that you're taking techniques from strength training and applying them to muscle building, or vice versa if you're trying to increase your lifts but you're doing muscle building routines.
Basically, just want to give you guys, when you're doing a specific program, we want to give you guys the optimal way to get to your strength training or your muscle building.
And I think the best way to do that is to talk about the 3 muscle building mechanisms, and we're going to talk about how they relate both to muscle building and strength training. Now, the 3 muscle building mechanisms are mechanical tension, metabolic stress, and muscle damage. Now, mechanical tension is probably the one that has the most crossover between strength training and muscle building. Mechanical tension is something that you guys have heard, progressive overload is a part of mechanical tension. And mechanical tension is basically placing a heavy load on your muscles. When you're trying to build muscle tissue, you need to place a heavier load, which is why for those of you guys who do only body weight workouts, eventually you will hit a plateau where you can only get so big just using your body weight. Then you go to the gym and you start using heavier weights to work within those rep ranges that are used for building muscle. And then the progressive overload aspect of it is that you're continuously pushing yourself set after set. But progressive overload is going to relate differently when building muscle versus building strength. So why don't you talk about it first in building strength, and then I'll relate it to building muscle.
Well, building strength, we're actually focusing more on the actual movement of the exercise rather than the muscles being activated. And what I mean by that is, for example, the bench press. When we're trying to build muscle, we're really focusing on that time under tension, really focusing on our form and just getting the weight up and feeling the chest activation. Whereas strength training, the whole point is to get as much weight up as possible, and we're gonna focus on coming down and really exploding up. So it's much more of explosion work, somewhat overtraining rather than, not overtraining, overload work, rather than progressive overload. So, which is why we'll be training at lower reps, say 3 to 5 mainly, and that's just gonna help us, it's gonna help our central nervous systems adapt to heavier loads. And again, with strength training, you do much longer rest periods, and that's a big difference in the tension on the muscle, the metabolic stress. And since we're doing longer rest periods, basically we're letting our muscles calm back down and take a rest, so when we come back at it, we can still lift that heavier load.
And they can add more weight to each set. And you guys, that's a great point that you made. What Mike does in his powerlifting meets, he's training for the movement, not actually trying to build that particular muscle. Because the referees at the meets, they don't care how Mike gets the weight from point A to point B as long as he does it. Granted, he needs proper form to make sure he doesn't hurt himself, but, if you're deadlifting 600 pounds, it's only going to get from the floor to up by your hips one way, by lifting the weight up. Might look a little funky, but hasn't hit 600 yet.
I'll get there. Beat him.
Yeah, he's beating me. Anyways, we'll move on from that. Because I'm talking about the building muscle portion, which is why I don't need a 600-pound deadlift. I'm okay at 530. Anyways, so Mike mentioned some interesting things. So there's longer rest periods in strength training. You see, you're resting more like 5 minutes, 4 to 5 minutes, so that you can go back to the exercise, add 5 pounds, add 10 pounds, add 15 pounds, so that you can train your central nervous system to be able to handle those heavier loads, and it's a much shorter rep range, and a lot of the times they'll pyramid down, like a 7-7-6-4-3 or a 5-3-1, various rep ranges like that. When you relate mechanical tension to building muscle, it's a little different because, yes, you need to push yourself on every single set. However, you might not be able to add 5 to 10 pounds per set because the rest period's much shorter. So you're resting like 30 to 60 seconds in between your sets. So set 1, let's say you're doing a bicep curl, you might hit 10 repetitions and it might be a really hard set. Maybe your spotter comes in around 8 or 9 to make sure you maximize that set. Spotter comes in, helps you get to 10, but your arms are so dead still from that intense set that when you do your next one 60 seconds later, you might have to lower the weight a little bit in order to hit that rep range still. However, when we're going to talk about this with the next point, that shorter rest period is a form of progressive overload because you are still overloading your muscles. They're still tired, they're pre-exhausted, and they're not really ready for another set, but you're forcing them to do it.
I think it's also really important to mention that for muscle building, the weight itself doesn't actually matter as much, where for strength training, the weight does matter. So for strength training, you're going to be training at a higher percentage of 1 rep max, because the entire goal behind strength training is to increase your overall 1 rep max, whereas muscle building, you're focusing on building your actual muscle.
And I think that's a great point to make because it's going to lead to the next thing, which is going to be metabolic stress. And metabolic stress is basically, increasing the overall volume of what you're doing, so more sets, more reps, and decreasing the rest periods, which is what I just talked about. And that's going to be drastically different in muscle building when compared to trying to build strength. Because when you're trying to build muscle, like Mike said, you're more worried about getting more repetitions in, you're more worried about getting shorter rest periods in, so you don't have that recovery time in order to put more weight on the bar, but it doesn't matter. Because all that matters when building muscle is that you destroy the muscle. A lot of people will basically say they're doing 3 sets of 10 repetitions. The first 2 sets, they'll get to 10, and they'll still have energy to be able to do like 5 or 6 more repetitions. If you do your first set and you get to 10, which is your goal, and you still have energy for 5 or 6 more, that's a completely wasted set. You didn't put enough mechanical tension on your muscle that you're trying to train to get any sort of muscle breakdown, and you've wasted your time. Every single set when trying to build muscle should be done until failure, to the point to where you have to do forced reps or have your spotter come in and help you complete the set. That is the only way you're going to get that muscle damage that you need in order to break it down. So with that being said, and as I mentioned earlier, if you're doing bicep curls and you're doing 10 repetitions with 80 pounds, the next set, because you only rested 30 seconds or 60 seconds, you might have to lower that weight to 70. But it doesn't matter because the whole point is killing the muscle. And if you get to your next set and you have to lower the weight, that means you did your job. You killed the muscle on the first set.
And that's one of the biggest differences, I'd say, with strength building, because when you're trying to get strength, again, you're focused on increasing your 1 rep max, so you're training heavy. You don't want to lower the weight. If you do end up failing, you're going to want to push some forced reps, again, for that overload training. You'd have much longer rest periods, so that's very different than muscle building. The longer rest periods, basically we're trying to make our central nervous systems adapt to heavier loads, so we're able to push more and be more comfortable with the actual weight that our bodies are have on ourselves.
I agree, and I would say the biggest reason why people fall into this category is there's a lot of misinformation on YouTube where people say you have to lift big to get big. Essentially, yes, you're right, but you're still lifting big if you're failing on every set when doing muscle building routines. And that's a really good point to make.
You'll see it in the fitness industry. There's a lot of very big bodybuilders who aren't necessarily that strong. Where in powerlifting, there's some guys who don't even necessarily look like they lift, but they'll deadlift like 700 pounds. It's really a difference in your training styles.
Yeah, and it's ego too. And a lot of us, when we get to the gym, we're men. We want to lift a lot of weight. We want to look strong. We want everyone to know how much we can lift. And so I think that's one of the reasons why there's a lot of crossover between these two types of training, as I think ego has a lot to do with it. So that's just, you kick that ego to the side and train right. So let's talk about the last one, which is going to be muscle damage. Now, muscle damage is very important when trying to build muscle. Why? Because we're trying to rip and tear as much muscle fiber as possible in every single set for regrowth. Now, I like using the biceps as the example because it's the easiest one to talk about, especially visually. If you're trying to maximize muscle damage, you need to be able to have total control over the eccentric and concentric motion of every exercise that you do. So the positive and the negative. And so, for example, again, if you're doing an 80-pound bicep curl for 10 repetitions, and you start off at the bottom like this, and you focus and use that mind-muscle connection, you focus on squeezing your biceps as hard as you can, and you keep that tension, and then you bring it back down, and you control the negative. So you're doing more like a 1-1-1 tempo. So 1-1,000, squeeze at the top, 1-1,000, control it down, 1-1,000, okay? Nice slow tempo like that, focusing on that area. You're gonna build so much more muscle with that 80 pounds doing reps like that than if you were to grab a 110-pound barbell curl and start thrusting it everywhere like this. You start doing this, your body doesn't even know what the hell's going on at that point. It doesn't know if it got hit by a car, if it was doing bicep curls, or what's going on. There's no mind-muscle connection there. The amount of muscle damage that you're creating, pales in comparison to a controlled rep. But that's not the case when it comes to strength training.
Strength training, though, it does activate a lot of the muscle damage, just not nearly as optimally as muscle building. So basically, like you said, when you're focusing on the muscle damage, like you're giving yourself shorter rest periods, you're focusing on breaking down that muscle, where again, for strength training, you're focusing on the actual explosion of the exercise. So we're not really considering the actual activation of the muscle, again, more focusing on the actual movement. And
how much do you bench?
I'm at 390.
Mike has a 390 bench press. If I'm trying to focus on building my chest, and I threw 390 pounds on the bar, even for my 1 rep max, do you really think that I would be able to go super slow down? I mean, there are some freaks out there, but go super slow down and super slow up, and that's your 390. If you could do 390 pounds, really slow down and really slow up, your max would be like 410, 415.
My whole mentality behind a lift like that is I'm getting it down as quick as possible, getting it up as quick as possible. I'm just focusing on getting that weight up, and that's one of the biggest differences with strength training and muscle building. You're just focusing on the actual weight for strength training and focusing more on the actual muscle for muscle building.
Yeah, and guys, remember, you're training the movement, not the muscle, but obviously, you're still going to build muscle when you're strength training. Muscle will come. It's just not going to be the primary focus of what you're doing because you're not doing a muscle building specific routine. So when you walk into the gym and you have your program in your hand, and whether that program says strength training or muscle building, you have to keep these things in mind so that you don't start letting your ego take over and you start doing things you're not supposed to be doing, because all it's going to do is halter your progress.
And that brings me to a point that I really wanted to mention in this video. Overall, I think it's really important that you do train both aspects of muscle building and strength, but maybe more different time periods. Say you focus on strength for this 6 weeks, and then if you're a strength trainer, maybe focus then 4 weeks on muscle building. And the reason I say that is because there's kind of like an endless cycle between the two. The more muscle you have, so the more muscle you've built, there's higher strength potential in those muscle fibers. And then on the other hand, the stronger you are, when you go back to muscle building, the more mechanical tension you're going to be able to place on those muscles. So it's an endless cycle. Being bigger, you're going to have more potential to be stronger, whereas if you're stronger, you're going to have more potential to build more muscle.
Great point, Mike. And we really hope that you guys took a lot from this video. So with that being said, if you guys are looking for a program to build power, to build strength, I'll put a link to Mike's Compound Corruption program. It's a full training program for you guys to take to the gym and build muscle. And if you're looking for a 12-week not to build muscle, to build strength. And if you're looking for a full 12-week program geared towards purely building muscle, I'll post a link to my shred challenge down in the info section below as well. So we hope you guys learned a lot from here. Make sure you check out Mike's channel, Anabolic Alien. Show him some love. Hit that like button. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. And as always,
Stay strong, nation.
more good stuff coming soon. See you guys.
Go.